we wish to extend a welcome to all of you tonight to the sanctuary that has been graced since the class, July 4th, with this lovely picture of St. Germain in oils as the third contribution toward the building of matrices of beauty and focuses for the ascended masters. Now everyone here realizes, I am sure, that just as a photograph does not even do justice to a human being in most cases, so these pictures do not, of course, do justice to the masters, for no one, even the great masters themselves, could create a body of electronic light essence with oil paint. Yet they are expressions from the heart. Their reproductive quality, as far as I am concerned, is very fine. They're splendid paintings. When you consider that this was Mrs. Hawkins' first portrait of Paul over here, and that this is her second picture, and you consider that the board of directors of the Summit Lighthouse felt that the quality was good enough to hang in the supreme sanctuary of this order, I think you can appreciate that it is a very fine piece of work. During the class, I pointed out that we have a lot of paintings given to us from different people. Some of these are unsolicited, and a few were solicited in the sense that the artist asked if they might paint a picture of the masters. We did have some unfortunate experiences in this regard, because when someone paints a picture, whether under our auspices or on their own, we are face to face with the problem of either accepting or rejecting it. Now, we cannot accept an inferior work because a friend does it. And we tell them this. We say, if your work is good, we'll take it. And if we don't like it for any reason, we won't hang it. And they have to understand that, and they do. Now, this is just the forerunner of what we believe will be a forte of great paintings of the masters. We expect to have many complementary paintings. I mean complementary in the sense that they do have dignity and beauty. I remember many years ago in New York City that some very fine artwork was available in the place where I spoke for the first year of my work for the masters. In fact, on the third floor, in the great ballroom there, with the crystal chandelier, directly beyond the stage where I stood, was a painting, a self-portrait of Paolo Veronese himself while he was on earth. I remember well that I used to concentrate on the pictures, but not on the pictures as oils, but as focuses of the masters. And they were symbols by which I was able to get some idea of the master's form and beauty. The master's hair was beautifully designed in a lovely color. Then in my mind I embellished it still further with greater beauty. It became electronic light essence. The picture shone. The spirit of the master was gazing out behind it. And so we brought to life the pictures, and they brought to life the masters to our consciousness. And thus, although the battle long ago raged in the church between those puritanical groups who felt that any outpicturization of a master, an angel, or a saint's form was a desecration, and those who felt that great art was a consecration, I join the latter, and I hold with those, including some of the great Catholic fathers of the past, that art can be noble and a consecration, providing the souls of the people understand that no one is worshiping the picture or the statue, but is only adoring God. I do not hold with those who believe in a bleak austerity where because of their non-acceptance of statuary and paintings, they choose to bar everything that's lovely and beautiful from their sanctuaries and say, well, God is a spirit, and we're going to keep everything on the spiritual plane. We're going to deny all form because it's desecration. I hold that form is a consecration. But in order to consecrate the form above our poor power to do so, we must go to God who made the form in the beginning. And we must sense that it is God. And we must be aware of His light and His love. And we must not in any way perform an act of idolatry, which is the false charge that some of the puritanical people brought out during the various periods of Christian history. I realize that there are people in the world today who will thoroughly disagree with me, but then I am not a person without opinion. I believe that we must stand for something rather than be against everything. And therefore I stand for beauty, and for the beauty in the sanctuary. And if I had my way, everything would be even more beautiful rather than less beautiful. I don't find any fault with it at all. And I think that the fault finders in the world today, who are always critical of someone else, have much in their own nature that requires correction. And thus they see their own imperfections many times manifesting in others. The first step then to correct seeing is the correction of the lens of perception. And therefore our subject this evening will be the warp in the lens of perception. It is true that God is a spirit, and that they that worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth. But how can we worship a spirit whom we do not know and cannot see and cannot perceive? The prophecy that is more than prophecy, the predilection of divine character that states, "Mine eyes are too pure to behold iniquity," clearly indices the mind of God and the perceptions of God. We find that God looked at His creation which He had made, and He said, "Behold, it is very good." Therefore, we must recognize that God has the quality Himself of perceiving the quality of very goodness in that which He creates. But in fact, God cannot Himself behold iniquity, for mine eyes are too pure to behold iniquity. And therefore not only does God see His own creation as very good, but He refuses and in fact is totally unaware of man's symbolic wretchedness, which manifests in myriad ways, creating destruction and wrong patterns. The patterns are also the warp in the lens of perception by human beings. And none of us, until we are ascended, are free from this warp in the lens of our perception. How can a lens of perception do anything to thwart the divine plan, to warp the image of manifestation in the world of form or anywhere? How can it be done? Let us now examine this very, very closely. First of all, let's use an eye. The human eye can faithfully reproduce what it sees on its own retina, providing it is not diseased and it is correctly formed. Light waves impinge or strike an object, and when the light waves go back to the eye, they form on the retina of the eye the photographic image of whatever is actually in the world of form. This photographic image is projected upside down there on the retina of the eye, and through the nerves, the optic nerves, is conveyed electronically to the brain, where it is turned right side up. So we see there is a rather involved process in seeing. But now we deal with physical light, physical objects, and physical perceptions, that is, the perceptions of the visible world. The spiritual world, the world of God, the world of reality, is seldom known by men, because each one creates their own identification with self. And there are very few people who actually are able to perceive the self as the self really is. And we call these men masters. Masters because they see as God sees, feel as God feels, and know as God knows. The power of God seeing, of divine seeing, is available to everyone on earth. Just as we were endowed with physical eyes that perceive light images, so we were given spiritual eyes that can perceive spiritual images. And not only spiritual images as one gazes through a kaleidoscope, where there is a vast burst of color and ever-changing form, but rather the perceptions that identify totally with God's vision, seeing as God sees, and therefore all things become good, because they are the creation of God and they are divine reality. We know, every one of us, that we constantly are faced with images that are less than perfection. In other words, I think I shall draw now upon the school of recent experience. In returning from this journey away from Colorado Springs just now, this evening, while I was away, I had an opportunity to contact a young man. He's only 20, and he soon will be tried in court for a crime which is not, strictly speaking, very, very serious. But the young man's attitude, as I told him, is very serious. He feels that all that he does in the world is right, and he feels that the whole world is against him, and he is in rebellion against the whole world, and he has committed many acts which are criminal acts. This young man, within the past few years, strung piano wire up across an alley to dislodge a police officer from his motorcycle and put him in the hospital. Then, while he was in the hospital, he went to see him and gloated over what he had done to him. His attitude was one of vendetta or vengeance. He feels that if anyone ever wrongs him, that he is going to punish that person and take that law into his own hands. And as I listened to him unfold his little story of his human cleverness, how he can cheat the telephone company out of as much as $65 in one night, how he knows exactly how to get money out of coin boxes, how he can make phone calls by hitting a telephone a certain way so it'll return his dime and still give him dial tone, how he and his girlfriend have worked out a scheme for making phone calls without paying for them, how in general he feels that the world owes him something. I was aware for the first time of an entirely different world of thought than my own world. You may be a bit surprised at this, because I had never before come in contact with so blatant an example of a person that was really quite nice in many ways. He had a nice personality. He was very pleasant. You would never think, in looking at him, what was going on behind the mask of his face. But no man or woman on this earth would be safe with this young man if they crossed him up, because he would not take anything from anyone, as he told me. through this experience of just meeting this young man, I suddenly saw, as the Master opened it up for me, a large segment of our young people today whose vision and perception has been warped by what they have perceived in others, in their parents, in the other generation, the elder generation, in life with dishonest congressmen and senators, school teachers performing criminal acts at times too, and many people doing things that they think they can do and get away with. Therefore, the young people today have actually been spoiled, many of them, by what they have seen. And therefore, what we see in life does influence our thinking and our acting. And in reality, we are what we think and what we feel. But we are only that during the time that we let these energies that are less than our divine perfection manifest through us. In effect, the reality of God that is always with us and above us is absent from us when the lens of our perception is turned away from divine reality into the human octave. When we are seeing through our eyes, whether we're looking at spiritual objects or physical objects that seem to be warped and out of step, we must recognize that there is a power in vision which can actually change our realization through changing our consciousness from God's consciousness into the human consciousness. The world today vibrates in a sea of molasses. Now, you don't realize at first when I say that what I really mean. But molasses is sticky and black, and it's very hard to get off of your fingers, and it's also rather sweet. It may even be nourishing. And this is the way with the world's consciousness. It has elements of good in it that is good for ourselves, things that are good to live with, food and drink and happiness of a worldly sort, and friends and recognition and some degree of beauty and some degree of security, but only a very relative degree of security. Now, it has all of this, you see. That's the sweetness of life. But it's an evanescent, a vanishing sweetness. You can't keep it. And you never could. You can't keep that kind of life because it is dark. The light that's in it is darkness. And it is sticky, which means that it's very hard to get off of your fingers or any part of your body. If you get it on your clothing, you better send it to the cleaners. And we get it on our clothing all the time. We get this substance of the human octave. This is the psychic man, the man that is not yet God realized. Now, we have a very real obligation to our divine self to be God realized. And there are forces at work in the world which are antichrist. All of the apostles were aware of this. These forces that are antichrist are no friend of ourselves. They are the forces that choose to direct us into the good human life with its stickiness, its darkness, and its sweetness, and to deprive us of the realities of God that come from the vision of God as God is. This vision of God as God is a vision for every man, woman, and child on the planet. And the greatest problem here is the huge dichotomy, the great gulf that is fixed between humanity and divinity. This is a gulf of perdition if we are not careful, because we can fall down into that and become enmeshed in our very search for the realities of God in the human, and that is what Antichrist wishes. Antichrist wishes to involve us in this. And Antichrist is ally of the power of darkness. What is an ally? An ally may be in high places. An ally may be as a spy is, right where the honey and sweetness of life is, the real truth. Because an ally is an ally of Satan, an ally of evil, an ally of the powers of darkness. But it doesn't seem so. It comes as a sheep, but inside it is a wolf. This signifies the masquerading power of the human. And all of us are subject to these conditions unless we desire to have the lens warp in consciousness corrected. An optometrist is consulted when vision blurs, when objects do not appear correct. We know something is wrong. We go to an oculist, we go to a doctor, we check for brain damage, we check for high blood pressure, we check for ruptures of blood vessels in the brain, or for brain tumors, all kinds of physical things we check for. And then if we cannot find the answer in the physical, and it is not in the eye either, where are we? Then we realize that something may be wrong in the consciousness. But if it's in the eye, we correct it with glasses, or exercise, or diet. We do something for it. But what do people do for spiritual diseases of seeing? What do they do for it? Do they keep the disease of continually looking at human imperfection in either themselves or others? Or do they shed it and recognize that here is the opportunity of man to be the pure in heart that can see God? We can find all of the excuses we want to as to why it is justifiable that we see wrongly, because we can say someone else did it. They did it. It's their fault, and they'll pay for it. But the truth is that we pay for it. Each of us pays for it, and we can't get out of it. I have found this out again and again. Every time that this occurs, it is my burden when I see anybody in imperfection. I talked with Dr. Isaacs, who was here at our conference, and we were discussing the fact that I had a small digestive upset. And he said, this is caused because someone has disturbed you in some way, even if you don't realize it. And so, more than his manipulative therapy, he gave me a dose of my own medicine. The very thing that I would have counseled other people in, he gave to me. But I was a little too myopic in a way, being involved in everything, to be able to fully recognize what was happening in my world. And this is often the case of the teacher, who goes through these very experiences in order that he may gain strength to understand others. And so, more than manipulation, he gave me this piece of advice which I would have given to someone else, because I well know the law involved. It was simply difficult to apply it to myself. And this is something then that I say to you all, that I can confess this to you with joy, so that you can pray for me that I will have a greater awareness, so that I will be less prone to disturb anyone else with my poor little warped perceptions. And if you then want to follow the Christ in the regeneration as I do, you won't mind walking right alongside of me, and run ahead if you wish. I'll only be glad if you do. Run into the perception that perceives that God has created his reality in everyone you know. There is a great difference between God's reality and human recognition of reality in all people. All people have God's reality, but all people do not have the recognition of that which they have It's there, but they don't know it. And therefore they're bound to make mistakes. All of them. We are all bound to make a few mistakes. We are here in this school of the masters, and on earth as the master's school, in order to correct our aberrations. If we had no aberrations, if we were absolutely perfect as Jesus the Christ, we would not be here. And therefore, because we have things to do, we are here. And we must review sometimes the simple, because the simple is profoundly affecting us and our vision of divine reality. Now, divine reality is actually not even known at all by some people. A lot of people have never seen God's reality. They have only seen a reflection of His reality. And that reflection sometimes is quite accurate. Because we have a tendency to see God in others, and we have a tendency to see the devil in others. Do you see what I mean? The God and the devil, I'm using these terms for negative and positive states of consciousness, and also for the divine reality, the absolutism of the divine, and the absolutism of the ultimate negativity. The devil, or evil, which means deified evil, being the opposite pole of the light, away from the light. Therefore, an awful lot of people see God only in others and see the devil only in others. They seldom recognize God or the devil in themselves or in the universe. Now, you don't realize just what a profound statement is being made to you. I know some of you don't realize it. It is couched in simple terms, and yet it seems a bit complicated, and it is in a way, but yet it's quite simple in another way. But on these facts that are being presented to you tonight are a key of great happiness, and also a key to great reality, a tender reality, a reality that you can use and put to work every day. And if you don't use it, it's just like shutting yourself off from a beautiful mansion, a man-scion, manifestation of Zion. It's shutting yourself off and living in a poor little hut and eating roots and berries and being nourished but unhappy. When you have a mansion of your own that God has created, a state of consciousness, in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, there ye may be also. That where I am, there ye may be also. That where I am, there ye may be also. That's reality. I am. That's being. That's reality. That's seeing. And without it, the warp in the lens of perception will give us distortion after distortion. And what is distortion? It is absence from God. It is absence from the light. It is absence from reality. It is absence from happiness. It is absence from the opportunity to spread happiness to others. If we cannot give others happiness, either by truth or by the truth of our life or by the fruit of our life, then we are of all men most miserable, because we have thwarted our divine opportunity. And it doesn't matter whether we do it once or 1,000 times. Qualitatively, if we let in a drop of dark substance into our world, it must be cleaned up, and if it's an ocean, brother, we've got a big job to do. Reality is God as God is, not God as we think He is. And God as He is can only come into our world as we demonstrate the Christ mind. Without the Christ mind, we cannot have the crystality that will make the lens of perception crystal clear. The crystal clear image is the image that paints something just the way it is. Some people say, "Oh, brother, do I know Mr. X? I have painted him to you not only just as he is, but he's a lot worse than I told you. He's far worse than I told you. I've been most charitable in my vision of Mr. X. I'll have you to know." Well, you can't do it. I don't care what your excuse, you can't do it, and I can't do it, and no one can do it. We can't play halfway with God. We can't play half God and half man. We have got to be honest all the way with ourselves. And if we want other people to judge us wrongly, we have to judge others wrongly, and it doesn't make any difference if we think we're judging other people rightly. If it is an act of any kind of judgment, it comes back to our own doorway, and we will be judged by it. Because the power of human matrices of thought and feeling is very great. Now, what is a human matrix of thought and feeling? It is any idea that we clothe with reality. And what is reality? Reality is anything that we think is real, whether it's real or not. If we think a thing is real, it seems so to be, and this is the basis of hypnosis. Under the influence of hypnosis, the hypnotist tells someone that they have a burn on their arm 4 inches long that comes from a flat iron, and that it's very, very painful. And did you know that the flesh will actually turn and sear under hypnosis, will rise up and turn bright red when no burn has ever been put there? That's because the lens of perception accepts the hypnotic warp of the hypnotist. And tangible ideas that we take into our brain and our being in daily living, even if they seem to be right, unless they are the very goodness of God, will produce some degree of warp in the lens of perception. And that warp in the lens of perception will create a warp in our consciousness. And therefore we will be unhappy because we are turning over our control to another. I have this very temptation daily. You run an organization even the size of this one, let alone the United States, as Lyndon Baines Johnson does. You run an organization, and you have a lot of people working with you and ostensibly for you. And if these people don't do everything just the way it should be done or the way you think it should be done, it is a terrible temptation to really become super disturbed by this manifestation. Therefore, all of us, in some degree or the other, have a similar problem. If we become disturbed by others, we become reactors. And I'm not talking about atomic reactors, I'm talking about human reactors. Almost 10 years ago, a lady pressed my pants before a service because the cleaners were closed. And I had to appear on the platform before a lot of people. And the cost of that suit with 2 pair of pants was $19, which I bought at the Heck Company in Washington, D.C., imported from Japan, and pretty sleazy material. In an unguarded moment, because I felt affection for her kind act of pressing my pants, I said, "You know, this suit only costs $19. Now 10 years has passed, and I received a letter earlier this year from this lady. She is angry because I have better clothes than I had then, although she wanted me to have them. She's angry because we have this lovely building and these grounds. She's angry because of all these things and very jealous over it. And she reminds me, although I did nothing to warrant this, she reminds me that she pressed my pants when I wore suits that cost $19. I want you to realize that that unhappy state of consciousness has rankled in that woman down low inside of her for 9 years. And now it bursts out in lettered form. Within a short time after writing me this awful letter, she fell and broke her hip. Now, I didn't wish her to break her hip, nor would I have done it. And if I could have prevented it, I would have stopped it. But I couldn't interfere with the law. It was her consciousness that had the warp in it and perceived this. I'm not trying to make myself a little Jesus, although I would love to be. But I want you to know that when I have a problem with anyone, I don't let the sun set on that day that I don't attempt to do all I can to iron it out right then and there. And it is my desire to stop the action of negativity once it takes over in my world. If it happens with me, I want to end it as quickly as possible. I don't want to keep it going. I don't want to keep it revolving like a squirrel cage of reactive thoughts. I don't wish to dump it on other people. And I don't want it on my own consciousness. And I realize that it's not Christ or God. We are very much a part of one another, all of us. You cannot hurt any part of the body of God and the rest will not bleed or feel the pain. If you smash your big toe, it may be only your big toe and it's not your head. But that big toe can cause that head plenty of grief. Because human beings are really linked together. And when war breaks out in some far-off province in Sikang or Timbuktu or Penang or anywhere in the world, that war is in our backyard in consciousness. And when any child of the light anywhere on the planet creates an error, that error is felt in the whole body politic. Therefore we rise together and we fall together. And if then we can master the problem of reacting to circumstances, we will have the battle half licked as far as a warp in our own perceptions. Now, most people are very honest. I want you to realize that. Most people are honest. And if they find a flaw in one another, they believe that they have honestly assessed it. I will acknowledge this. But many times they have not. And even if they have, and this is the point I wish to make, because the whole human race is imperfect, they are not going to strengthen the bonds of the person's perfection that they find the fault with by finding it. They can only correct it by correcting the lens of perception in themselves and removing the warp, and this gets back to Jesus' statement, take the mote out of your own eye and you can clearly see how to take the saw log out of your brother's eye, or vice versa. Take the saw log out of your own eye and you can clearly see how to take the mote out of your brother's eye, which is a very small object. A toothpick may be smaller than that, a splinter. Therefore, we have a very real obligation, and this is not just for you, Irwin Arndt, or you, Guy, it's for everybody. It's for the whole world. It's the obligation to interpret spiritual reality. Every human being that's in error, every human being that's manifesting less than God's perfection and that sees less than God is going to manifest some warp in themselves. So by also manifesting it in ourselves, we will not strengthen anything in them but their own warp of perception. if they accept the condemnation that we level at them, they are strengthening that. And we have strengthened it in ourselves also, because karma then swings full circle. And when it does, sooner or later, in this embodiment or another, or somewhere along the line, justice will be done, and we will find ourselves doing the same thing that the other person that we found fault with has done. And we will not probably even recognize that we are doing it. Now, we can, if we wish, disabuse our minds of divine reality, and we can always justify everything that we do. I know how easy it is to justify things. The tongue and brain of man is gliding. It readily comes up with an excuse. Well, the reason I did this was because so-and-so did that. And this is common knowledge all over the planet. You find it in mud boxes and in sand boxes. And you find it along the beaches. And you find it out on the mountaintops. And you find it in families. And you find it everywhere. Between parent and children relationships, between husband and wife. You find it all over the world. It is what keeps us down in the molasses strata. We're down in that sticky, sweet substance, that dark substance. And God's light is up here. And if we don't get above the fly line of human perceptions, we are going to continue in that thought. And there is no power that can break it except our willingness to surrender ourselves to God. Now, it might sound as if I think I could bombard you with words and thus free you. I cannot do it. My words have no power to stir you whatsoever unless you let it. Unless you recognize the truth in it. Unless you realize the sincerity of my heart in bringing it to you. Unless you're willing to make some change so that you can see God as God is. If you're not willing, my words will be no more than the thrashing of a fan against the air. And error will continue. But if we really want that improvement which the Masters want us to have, that will enable us in this activity to put forth a face of beauty to people that is not the beauty of an apple, that on the outside is beautiful and lustrous and embellished with all of the promise of sweet taste delight, that when we bite into it, it is nothing more or less than an apple filled with burned ashes. Instead of the taste of sweetness, we have the bitterness and the lie of human causticism. Now I am given right tonight a special connection in this talk between one of the great masters of the Great White Brotherhood that I am not permitted to identify. He is a very, very great disciplinarian on the inner planes, and it's not Serapis. And he is pointing out here some of the practical laws that govern the manifestation of reality. I want you to know that mankind go through as many as 100 embodiments and never see God. All they see is this miserable miasma of human fault-finding and self-pity and indulgence and struggle. And it is the sense of struggle that makes that struggle. They've got to leave it behind permanently in order to achieve reality. When that reality is worth it. It's worth it for one and it's worth it for all. The harmony of your body is affected by the lens of your perception. If you perceive God's reality as He really is, and that crystal clear orb really draws the lines of God's delight into focus, if you can pierce the veils of mortal reason and self-justification and find divine reality, not human reason, you're bound to be happy and free. And it's a good feeling, a mighty good feeling. It's worth all the delights that you've ever had and more too. It's worth all the money in the world. It's worth all of your treasures, all of your qualifications. It's worth everything. It's worth your life. And without it, your life does not really have the meaning God put into it. Is not then this goal worthy of our thought? Is this goal not worthy of our consideration? Should we not examine what is the meaning of reality? Should we not search out and see as to whether or not we really have tasted reality? Because what is reality? Reality has been defined as that which we see as real. And this is perhaps the mundane interpretation. But there is an actuality behind the reality. It is the nature of what God really is. And God is more than father, more than mother, more than husband, more than wife, more than confidant, more than mentor, more than comforter, more than treasurer, more than the veiled promises, more than the promises themselves, more than time, more than eternity, more than space. And that reality can be touched. We can touch it. You and I can touch it together. We can touch it in the days ahead, as those days ahead blend with the days behind. And the best qualities of the days behind are projected forth into the span of the days ahead. Now we stand at the threshold of opportunity. Now we stand before the veil. And the veil is ready to part. But it requires our act of seeing God as He is. And it is not enough for us to see God as He is in the spiritual sense that we love Him as a spirit, but we love not those in whom He manifests. Whether that manifestation be the manifestation of perfection, or whether that manifestation be that which is yet in the process of becoming that which God already is. We have got to recognize that when Jesus took a baby, a child, and held him in His arms, and He said, "Suffer the little ones to come unto me, and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of heaven," that He meant every single child man. He's not talking just about little infant babies. He's not talking just about children. He's talking also about grown-up adult children of His kingdom. That we understand that they have to have a chance here to perfect themselves. They are not already perfect. And I tell you that every one of these imperfect little children on this planet has an angel which does even now behold the face of the perfection of the Father, now beholds it. And we say, "You are guilty." Guilt is something that we all have, but that we all should shed. We should shed it because it is the shame that came into the Eden of God in the beginning. It was the shame that perceived good and evil because it ate of the fruit of the knowledge of good and of evil. Whereas God's consciousness was then, is now, and shall forever be a consciousness only of that goodness which He manifests. And He could not even ever have any other consciousness in Him. For if He did, it would instantly outpicture in form forever. And then there would be no opportunity for correction of imperfection. Because you see, if God saw evil in creation, the very mind that created all things by reason of His omnipotence, if He saw evil anywhere, when He saw it, He would energize it. And then in the universe, evil would be springing up everywhere, and it could never be uprooted, never taken out of cosmos, because God would have endowed it with reality. But it has no reality to God, and therefore in God there is a hope for perfection for ourselves. And there is no other hope whatsoever except in Him. And He in us is the arbiter of our perfection. Without him we are of all men most miserable now. With him we are of all men, indeed, Felix the happy, one who is filled with happiness because we do not perceive the darkness of our shame, but we perceive the joy of our reality, the flame of immortality, the thrust of purpose, with a flare to be fair unto ourselves as unto all men everywhere, to acknowledge that it is compassionate prayer that molds all life everywhere and enfolds all life in God design. The symbol then of reality, we have called God because he is with us, Emmanuel. The Lord is with you. The Lord is in your spirit, and the Lord is your spirit. The Lord is the Lord of life and the Lord of death. The death of the old man that must be put off with his deeds, and the immortality of God that refuses to energize weeds, but prefers instead to manifest the seeds of gentility, of kindness, of understanding, of Christ awareness, of truth, of a light so brilliant that it can never be extinguished, and of a passion for freedom from our own errors. Unless we have this, we are yet in our fond infant beginnings. With it, nothing shall be impossible unto us. And today is the day of salvation. Each day must be lived to its fullness as a day of opportunity that will swing open a door. And when that door is open, it brings us a step nearer to the reality of God, and every error we make is a stepping stone. Make it a millstone around your neck if you wish. It will be your neck. Use it as a stepping stone into the kingdom of God, and it will be your beautiful heart that will beat with joy going through that door as you rise step by step upon the stair. It is up to you. There is nothing I can do and nothing I can say except to portray the message of emancipation and deliverance. And that message of emancipation and deliverance is through correction of the warp in the lens of perception. And there is no greater subject that we can possibly bring forth to you. Because without this correction, seeing is aberration. With it, seeing is adoration. What you see and love, you can adore. And what you see and do not love is aberration. And you cannot adore it. In fact, you despise it. And thus we do not despise people, nor do we adore people. We despise wrong principle. We adore right principle. And we must be above person, because all of the work of God and all of the work of the great white brotherhood is above persons, places, conditions, or things. It is above time and circumstance. It is above past, present, and future. It is above ourself and all whom we know, and all identification with all that we have ever been in all lives now past. in the far and distant and dim past as well as the seemingly distant future. Yet this much is clear, that the Christ image draws nigh and awaits externalization in the manger of our heart. We have had no room in the inn of our being for the realities of God. And we have said to Joseph and Mary, we will not accept this child there. Take him to the stable of consciousness, where we will let him lie down with the animal kingdom. And so the babe is born in the manger, in the lowest part of man's nature. The babe is born, and there mingles in human life, in the world, divinity and scorn. Divinity in the humanity of the Christ that's within us, and scorn for our fellow men, whom we regard sometimes as nothing more than animal figures in this manger, where the Christ is yet a babe and is not grown up, and there is no room in the inn of our being for his reality. We refuse to see as he sees and to be as he is. We wist not that he must be about his Father's business. And when he grows up in us to the age of 12, and we become accountable of sorts to the higher law, we fail to recognize that we are. And we say, look, my son, I brought you a long ways. I brought you up, and here you are now. We rebuke you. We're your parents. The outer man attempts to teach the hidden man of the heart. He tries to compromise his conscience. He tries to take dominion and say, well, I have brung you thus far. It is the Christ that has brought us to a point where we can know the meaning of his star. We have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him, was the message of the Magi, who brought him gold and frankincense and myrrh. The myrrh is for the burying of the negativities in our world as we anoint it to the burying. And the frankincense is the joy as we raise the divine qualities of the Christ into manifestation. There's that beautiful odor of sanctity toward God. The roses that within the soul pour out their perfume as we live the Christ life toward every human being that we encounter, whether they're in error or whether they're in truth. And the gold that is never hypocrisy to ourselves, but is the golden rule of Christ's manifestation. We bring these gifts to him who was born King of the Jews. The Jews here being the children of promise, for he has also brought to the Gentiles a great light, and all the earth basks in the light of this Son of God. And so the young child consults now then with the doctors, which signifies the higher intelligence of our carnal mind. And we try to argue away our divine inheritance, and the child unfolds the law before us if we let him. And the law becomes most wonderful, and the doctors themselves are confounded in the temple. And the child waxes strong, and he manifests still other great deeds. And finally he becomes preeminent and dominant in the life of the individual. And then the young child is ready to depart on the 30th year of his manifestation. The fulfillment of the law of the 3 times 3. Initiation 3 times. Physical initiation, mental initiation, and initiation in the feelings of man leads him to the victory of the 3 times 3. And at 30 he goes out to minister unto men. And 3 years does he minister, which signifies the perfection of God being brought into manifestation in the 3 times 3. Each part of himself then, in each year to its fullness, coming into manifestation. And the 33 symbolic of the great conferred degree of mystic masonry, is shown as the hinges of the door of the figure 8. Take the 2 threes and put the halves together of the shell. What do you have? You have here the great macrocosmic being of man. This is the upper part of the Silex coffee maker. Down in this circle down here, you have the other 8. It's the eightfold path, all right, to divine reality. And what happens is that this substance down here boils up. The human raises itself for transmutation to God on the altar of God. And it comes up to the Christ for mediation. And it's lifted through the Christ. Where I am, there ye may be also. You are lifted up to God, literally in His arms. And when you're lifted up, all of the problems of your world are brought up for transmutation. You don't bring it up to take it down in the same way it went up. You take it up so it's corrected. And when it's corrected, God comes down in its place. And if God doesn't come down, then you remain with your old consciousness still. And the alchemical work is yet to be done. You have within your power the determinate factor in time. You can hinder the kingdom of God, or you can hasten it. This is God's gift to you. It's your opportunity. We either come with Him, or we are against Him. We are either with Christ, for Christ, or we are anti-Christ and know it not. And His mercy endureth forever. There are none of us that have erred or gone astray at any time along this pathway of life that God is not concerned with. He wants to end our strife, perfect our soul, and open wide the door. In this treasure of life, His life and ours, we share a mutual responsibility. He has not failed of His. May we pray together. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be Thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth even as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, even as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For Thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and forever.